So, thank you everyone. Great to see you all here. I'm very happy to be invited here to talk about my favorite things in the world, which are humans, nature, and food. So this is what we will be talking about today. Who doesn't love that? And I have some slides, which will be coming shortly. So I want to talk about what is good agriculture. What does that mean? What kind of concepts do we need to take into account to consider an agricultural policy or agricultural, the whole of agricultural human project a good one and not a bad one? There's lots of these concepts about it floating around, and I'd like to frame some of them in a new way, in a way that I think is missing a lot in the public sphere. And we want to be able to ensure a sustainable food supply in the future. First off, before I start talking about this, you heard a lot of great information from Rudy. I'm really honored that he was here and was able to present on, because he has such great experience in this from decades before us, before any of us were born. And I would love to convey a little bit about why it matters. Why should you listen to him? Why should you care about these things? Yeah. So what is good agriculture? And then? It's coming. This is me. A little bit about me. So I think that for you to know why you should care about what I'm saying, you need to know why I'm talking about these things here, why I'm here today personally. So I'm Iida Ruishalme. I'm Finnish biologist. I like butterflies. I am also an environmentalist, and I tend to call myself a tree hugger. Since I was a child, I was also, like Mark said, I had this great passion for nature. I love being in nature. So for me personally, having this rich natural world is very important. Oh, I have it now. Yes, there you go. So this is me in Finland, enjoying the Lapland wilderness and the incredible richness of lichens and stuff that we have there. I go completely bonkers about those. And this is me in Switzerland, where I live with my family. So I would like to add that I'm not just a biologist and environmentalist. I'm also lots of different things. Well, like all of us, we have, I'm a mother. I love dogs. I love animals. I have a little sausage dog at home. I love climbing and swimming and hiking, these kind of things. So this is the kind of personal connection I have for nature. And that's actually what makes me come here and talk in front of an audience, which actually makes me really nervous, and I don't really like it. But I love nature, which is why I'm talking about these things here. So what I really want to do as a mother is that my children will have the same kind of rich natural world to enjoy as I've had. Thank you. So this is why it's very important for me that we get environmental ideas right. So as we said, we need to critically analyze these topics. We think so. Anybody who's into science, because I'm also a scientist and I really like data and graphs and facts, we think that we should critically analyze all these ideas. But it's not because we want to be like besserwissers, or we want to say that that is wrong and we have a better idea, this is better, and nitpick or pick apart somebody's well-meaning ideas. It's because there is that passion for those goals that we really want to get there as well, and we want to make sure that we are not making any mistakes along the way that might take us in some other direction. So you need to know what are our values for you to know if you should care at all what we are talking about, what we're trying to say. So what kind of, let's see, I have to figure this out. There was a clicker somewhere. No. The arrows on the keyboard. I'm pressing the arrows. Now, there you go. Where did we go? Here. So What do we want? You need to know, what do we want? What are our values? So this is me, as I said, tree hugging. Just a few days ago, in the Białowieża primeval forest in Poland, I was completely lyrical to be able to go to this place and witness this kind of untouched nature. So this is part of what we as WePlanet want. We want these incredible, amazing natural ecosystems untouched, so that everybody can enjoy this kind of natural richness. But of course, we also, like humans, we really want to have, we really want everybody to enjoy welfare. We want people to be well fed. So this is why I want to put both of these pictures here. We have food, lots of wonderful, plentiful food, and we have nature on the other hand. So good nourishment for all. For us, it's self-evident, but we still have almost 10% of the population in the world who are malnourished. We have more than 1 in 5 children in the world have stunted growth because of malnutrition. So we're not there yet. We need to do better, and we can do better. It's also something that Rudy touched on. He talked with terms like labor productivity. And why is this important? What is labor productivity? It sounds very technical. So if we have a poor family in the global south on subsistence farming, labor productivity means if you want to have enough to eat, you have to work real hard. Not just you and your partner, but also your children. Everybody has to work really hard on the fields in order to survive, in order to have enough food. So we don't just want everybody to be well fed, we also want it not to be at the cost of their own welfare. We want them to be able to send their kids to school, we want them to enjoy a good standard of living. So this includes a lot of complex societal factors. Obviously, it's not just a simple matter of giving them food. We want everybody to be able to provide food for themselves, the societies, to have the means and access to lift themselves from poverty and develop their societies to the direction that they would wish. And at the same time, all farming unavoidably encroaches on the natural world. So these two concepts are actually in conflict with each other. We would really love to view farming as a sort of a lovely entwined process harmonious with nature, a sort of Garden of Eden idea. And this sometimes gets in the way of appreciating true wild ecosystems and remembering the value in those. Of course, we want to have thriving, healthy, biodiverse agricultural landscapes, but we also have to remember that if we want true wildlife, then we need space that's left outside of human influence. So good agriculture is something that balances these two concepts in the best possible way, to put it very simply. It's a complex challenge, of course, but that is it in a nutshell. So, how do we get there? That's a big question. There he comes. So, this ties back into the next generation of tree huggers that I'm raising at home, because this is a really complex question. How do we burden the planet less while supporting people's welfare better? And I was walking just 3 weeks ago with my daughter, who's very concerned about trees. She kept asking me in our village, where could we plant more trees? Out of the blue, she was wanting to plant trees everywhere. She asked, but there we could have some space for trees. These buildings, maybe they're not in use, maybe we could take them away and plant some trees. So I was really touched, and I told her that, she's 11 now, and I said, Mummy does exactly this at work. I'm wondering, where could we have more space for trees? This is exactly that. I totally sympathize. And then I asked her a few questions to start the discussion, and I'd like to ask these questions of you as well. So what do you think is in the way, well, in the way of planting more trees, but let's say, what do you think is the greatest threat to global biodiversity? You might have heard this a million times, so you might remember it, or it might be so obvious that you no longer even think about it. What would you say is the #1 threat to global diversity? Any guesses? Farming. Land use. Anti-science. Anything else? Deforestation. Poverty. Really nice answers. My 11-year-old didn't do quite as well. But basically, we've heard the same script since we were kids. Habitat destruction is the #1 threat to global biodiversity. Habitat destruction, what does that mean? You were already jumping ahead and trying to answer that question, because exactly that's where it leads us. Because the next question I asked my daughter was, since we were in the village and she wanted to find space for trees in the village, I asked her, do you know how much space on all of the Earth's surface do our villages and towns, all our urban infrastructure, how much space do we need in percentage for all of that? Do you have any guesses? I'm talking about habitable land surface, which is slightly smaller than glaciers and salt flats and stuff. Stuff where plants grow. How many percentage is cities? 5, 1, 2, yes? 1. You're way too well informed. This is cheating. I bet you looked this up before. And so you be quiet now. How much land is taken up by all of farming? Pastures, fields, everything. If you'd had to guess, if you haven't checked it up before, if you had to guess, how much? 15. 2. 30. Half. I know you know the answer. Let's go to the answers then. So, here where we have habitable land in the middle, the big answer to that last question is agriculture takes up about half of all habitable land surface that we have at our disposal. So can you see cities in this graph? It's a bit small, so you might not. It's the second last little line there. So we talk a lot about urban sprawl. My daughter is really concerned about what do we do in our villages, and this is important to us and our environment. But in the greater scheme of things, it's really just a rounding error what we do with cities. If we don't consider agriculture, any small change in agricultural use will already nullify whatever we do with the urban areas. So basically, this is the #1 threat to global biodiversity. Habitats are getting destroyed because of agriculture, because of farming. Also, we have, I'll come back to the figure a bit later, that's about 50 million square kilometers for agriculture. We have about 37 million square kilometers, no, 37% for remaining forests. But if you break up the agricultural bars further, you get, you notice that there's this lion's share of agricultural land that's actually pasture and crops that feed animal, livestock, all our animals, meat and dairy. And this meat and dairy actually gives relatively small returns because it's only about 18% and 37% of our calorie and protein supply. So from this very land-hungry portion, we get a relatively small portion of food in return. So, I'm expecting a rain of papers at some point. I'll go to the next slide. Just to underline this a bit more, this is from Royal Society ecologist, conservation ecologists who are looking at what in human influence actually threatens species. So we're looking at threatened species of different kind of, you have plants and chordates, that's anything with a cord in their back, so basically animals, and fungi and everything else. The first big bar we have is agricultural land use. Most of the threatened species that we have are threatened by agricultural land use. That means the taking up of space of their habitats. Where they used to live, they no longer live there. It's quite simple really if you think about this, but we really hear way too little talk about this. So what we hear a lot of talk about is agricultural pollution. A lot of people are concerned about agricultural pollution. That's important because actually it is a big threat, but if we should use our proportionately our concern for wildlife, then we would be at least more than 4 times as concerned about land use. Instead, we see a lot of efforts to fix agricultural pollution and very little efforts in the public sphere. From agricultural scientists, yes, they want to fix agricultural expansion very much. But nowadays, especially in Europe, the trends are to talk about different kind of fixes on how we can pollute a little less, reduce those risks. Sometimes we can really reduce those risks well without having any losses in yields. Some other times we reduce risk minimally and might even have a big impact on yields. Yields, on the other hand, mean that to produce the same amount of land, same amount of food, we need more land. So we go back to the threat to wildlife that comes from land use. So this is really important. And I haven't actually talked about another thing which usually we always talk about, which is emissions. Usually we always talk about agricultural emissions. But land use happens to be a really major contribution to agricultural emissions as well. Land use change when we lose forests, the opportunity cost of how much more carbon we could actually bind if we had wild ecosystem in those places. So the first time that IPCC, the UN Climate Panel and the UN Ecosystem Services Panel, IPBES, met for a workshop to discuss synergies, they really underlined the fact that we need to protect carbon-rich, biodiverse ecosystems. It's a win-win. And they even made a very difficult estimation. This is, they started to try to estimate the requirements for effectively protected and conserved areas to ensure a habitable climate, self-sustaining biodiversity, and a good quality of life. How much would we need to conserve? And they say maybe it could be between 30 and 50% of all ocean and land surfaces. And now you remember, we're already at more than half. So it doesn't leave a lot of margin for error there. And we've gotten there really quickly. The human population has grown by a huge leap during the last couple of 100 years. So this has become, has been a huge expansion of farmland because of this. We simply need more food. But as Rudy talked about, this could actually look a lot worse. Still, you see here, the green part, grazing, is the biggest land burden that we have. Cropland is a lot smaller. And the little yellow tip there is a built-up area. You can't actually see it. It's a bit light, but also very small. So why could it look a lot worse? Rudy talked about the trends in agriculture, the dramatic shift since 1960s, what has happened with our agricultural crops. So we have cereals, how much cereals we could produce, and then on the flat line we have how much land we're using for cereal. So you see the land hasn't really changed, but somehow we get more and more and more wheat and oats and other maize and other cereals out of that same land. And at the same time, obviously, there's the population that has risen that has needed that food, so we've been feeding them. But looking at that level of population, I just want to, for you to appreciate that there are lots of trends that say that we should go back to less intense forms of farming. So just to take a thought experiment, let's say that we had still pre-1960s methods of agriculture, and we were producing the same amount of food to feed the population that we have today. We would need more than all habitable land surface area at our available to us. if we try to do it today. So simply, that would not be possible. We can't return to that old way of doing if we don't either want to decimate all nature, period, on land surface, or let lots of people starve. A lot more people starve. And here I'd like to say a word about the fact that I had this discussion with my daughter about planting trees, and I really, really love that she wants to have more trees. But should the choice be that I would protect a forest or that I would plow it over and grow crops so that my daughter wouldn't have to go hungry, I wouldn't have the luxury of that choice. I could not, as a mother, choose to protect the forest if my children need food. So this is why human welfare and environmental goals are interlinked. We can't ask the global south to protect nature if they don't have enough to eat. It's just not possible. We would never do it ourselves. So, since we want to feed people, let's assume that, what do? We are still having a population growth until at least 2100, and we still have people who go hungry today. So something has to happen. We have really good estimates from World Research Institute, where they look at where will we be at 2050. At 2050, depending on what kind of path agriculture takes, where are we? They are saying that if we would actually stay at this level, we would not be concerned with more yield gains. We would just continue on. Then we would need approximately 30 million square kilometers more land by 2050 to feed everyone. And this would be basically most of the remaining forests gone. They do foresee that we will have gains, and they think that probably with what they can estimate now from the trends now, we should be able to do with just about 6 million square kilometers more. But they do, acknowledge that this is actually bad. So this is why they call it the land gap. We should have a way of breaching that gap, because every conservation biologist you talk to says that we don't have 6 million square kilometers in a back pocket to give extra. We need to reverse that trend. We need to shrink that footprint. So we need to do something to do better. And the thing is that actually there are a lot of ways that we can do better. We can do a lot better with a lot less land. It's possible. This is the really optimistic, great message. It's not a pipe dream. It's completely possible. There are several ways to do this, several pathways, and all of these pathways have some challenges. They can be political, technical, they can be behavioral and psychological challenges. But I think that it's such an important topic that we really need to remind ourselves to have the open mind to consider all of them, consider using all of the above. So Rudy talked about some of the ways that we can still improve agricultural methods themselves, the same way as was done during the Green Revolution. So this is still ongoing, and I know that some of our agricultural scientists and molecular scientists are really optimistic about how much we can actually improve yields. Some experts say that it will never be as drastic as it was in the Green Revolution. There are still some areas, like in Africa, where you actually haven't had those gains yet. So the Green Revolution gains you've had elsewhere can still be achieved in some other places. So there's a mixture of this. Some places you can have a really dramatic improvements. Some other places maybe not as much as Green Revolution. But you need more. We need to shrink that footprint, not just meet the demand. So this is why I also talk about two other different important avenues. And one of them I map as management and behavioral, because it's more about what we do with the food. And there's of course food waste. I won't go into it now for time. That's an important thing to address, but it has limits. It's quite limited. And then we have diet changes. Obviously, since we have one part of agriculture, the livestock agriculture, that takes such a huge amount of resources, land, water, there's emissions connected to it, there's animal suffering to consider, there's lots of things that we could do better there. So there is a really important avenue for rethinking how could we do with less. And how could we do with less is connected directly to technical innovation in food that's been really happening in the last decade even, and I think it's accelerating. We are seeing a lot more easy alternatives, let's say, easy alternatives that remind us very much of the meat products we're used to, that have more similar taste, but are actually based on some plant protein or plant instead. And we have some really exciting, nerdy, new technologies that lots of us are really excited about, like precision fermentation, where you actually produce the proteins and fats from microbial tanks instead, using dramatically less resources, producing the same kind of cheesy and eggy things that we like to eat. And then there's also the very high-tech, the cultured meat, the animal cells themselves grown in culture, creating a beef completely without animals, or chicken nuggets without chickens, and so on. So these are really important trends. And why am I talking about diet change being so important? I think that this slide, for me, is very sobering. I'll explain too. It's a very colorful map. It doesn't say much on its own. So here we have a look at diets. Average diets in different countries, and the blue diets, or the blue countries. Each country, if its diet was applied globally, so everyone ate the same way as that country, you have the classes of the different colors. Blue, we would need less land than we use right now. That's great, but those countries are also the countries where there's actually a lot of people are still going hungry. So we don't want that. That's not the solution in itself. We also want people to have lots of food. Yellow countries are those where if their diet was the global diet, with today's methods, we would need to use more land. There's everything from 101% to 190%, so you don't know how much more, but all the yellow ones, we would need to use more land. And the red ones, well, those are impossible because we don't have enough land. So everybody can't eat like that because we don't, we need another planet, basically. So clearly there's some unfairness going on here, because if some people think that their diet is great and they can continue farming the way they do today, then that means they assume that everybody else shouldn't be allowed to eat the same stuff in the same way as they are eating. And I mean, obviously, US is the worst. US is the worst, so we can all hate on US, yay. But Europe is unfortunately not very good. I'm Finnish and I'm Swedish, so I'm just going to be quiet. Poland, on the other hand, is actually on the lower end of the European scale. If everybody ate a Polish diet, we would only need about 25, 30 million square kilometers more land. So about 50% more. So let's not all do that either. Sorry. So there's a big potential for change here. Different methods that require less land, diet changes that choose different foods that require less land. I would just quickly want to show that there are existing trends of this, that rich countries are actually starting to eat less, especially beef and mutton, so sheep and cows take a lot of land. So those consumptions are going downwards. It's not exactly drastic. We'd like to see more, but we'd also like to just throw it out there that we want to be able to support these trends in a positive way. We don't want to shame and guilt, because that just causes a reaction back. We just want to find positive, encouraging ways of finding ways to enhance these trends. They don't count. Maybe they were too depressing. I don't know why they weren't included. But if I still have some time, I would like to talk a little bit about some stumbling blocks. So I hope that I have really tried to make the case why land use is so important to take into consideration. You can't talk about good agriculture, good agricultural policies without taking into consideration land use first and foremost. It's not the only thing. We want to have other things. Agriculture is really complex, but that's really important not to forget land use. So this is why I just want to talk about a few concepts and then how they relate to some of the trends we see in EU and in UN. So a lot of us have probably talked about energy matters, and we have realized that, you know, in many discussions we have methods that become goals. We want decarbonization, so then people think that let's build a lot of renewables. That's great, they can produce low carbon energy. And then the goal becomes we have to build lots of renewables, period. The ultimate goal, the decarbonization, is forgotten behind the method which has become a goal on its own. So this happens easily in many areas. So here in agriculture too. So as I said, I want the goal to be really clear: human welfare, thriving natural world. Land use is very important for that. Let's not forget that. Some of the methods, the preferred methods of agriculture, talk about a lot of different things. They want to address a lot of other problems in agriculture in general without addressing the land use at all. Often their proposed solutions may even make the situation worse. And why? It has to do with our natural risk perception. We are often easily alarmed by things like artificial and unfamiliar sounding new technologies. We want to be cautious about biotechnology and pesticides and synthetic chemicals. So then we view those risks as more, as greater, as more harmful, as more immediate, whereas the idea that we are plowing down another forest and making a field, it's unfortunate. It's not scary. It's not scary to us. We just may be sad, but we're not scared. With an unfamiliar risk, we are more acutely scared and gripped. So this causes the method of reducing scary, unfamiliar technologies to be able to take the place of these goals. And this is because we often forget that everything in agriculture is a trade-off. If we do this, we get less of this. If we do better here, that has the trade-off of something being worse off here. So we have to remember both sides. If we ban something, if we change something, it will have an influence on yields, it will have an influence on land, and so on. Another important concept is for food security on this side. So half of us here today are alive because of Haber-Bosch reaction. That is the way of synthetically producing nitrogen. This is usually a slow process that bacteria does. It takes nitrogen from the air, makes it available for plants. But chemists this century, 19-something, they came up with a way of doing this on their own in the lab and making synthetic fertilizers. Synthetic fertilizers are really hated, but I don't want to hate half of you. We're quite happy to be alive. So obviously there's this is a trade-off. They can be used in a wrong way, but they can also feed us, so we are here. And the fact that farming is dependent on external inputs is actually a good thing. I want to say this because you hear a lot of the opposite. So that we need to input nutrients, fertilizers, to the field, it shows that we have been able to feed people outside of the field. We have taken those nutrients and we have given people in the city something to eat. That means nutrients have traveled. They have gone to humans who want to eat them. And that means that they will magically replenish themselves, not in that rate that we are eating them. It's a very slow process. It happens naturally in jungles and forests, but a jungle and a forest will not support many organisms, not many big communities of humans. It will limit the amount of people that could live on them. So basically, we've circumvented this, which means that in order for mining not to become, in order for farming not to become a mining operation, that we simply mine the soil of its nutrients, we have to return the nutrients back in. So this is an issue because some of the trends now, Rudy mentioned agroecology. There are lots of good things about the science of agroecology, which is just understanding ecosystems of agriculture and economics around it better. But then it's also become a movement that has lifted some things into virtues on their own. That, for instance, reducing inputs is virtuous on its own, not up to optimal level, but there's even talk about that you should have no input agriculture, which means no outside inputs to the field. So this doesn't make sense as a, you know, if you want to feed people, the nutrients won't come back. You will have, in the end, you will have a lower productivity, so you will have chosen to either feed less people or use more land to use it. So it's really important to remember that some of these concepts in the background, not to lose track of these ultimate goals that we want to have. Do I still have time? No. All right.